So this is a reading from Spilling the Light by Teresa I. Soto. A charm for hope, a string. This is a charm for hope. The first thing to do is tie a string around your finger. Remember that you are not alone. Think of the ways that our best shared futures are braided inextricably with your own present and your destiny. The second thing is to untie the string and let the knots and tightness fall away. Let the burdens of bleakness roll off your sore shoulders. Resistance on these opaque horizons requires only one source of strength, one ray of light. Remember that persistence doesn't require all the answers up front, only one. Fortunately for all of us, we have one response: to remain together through awkward times and happy ones. We remember and we find our resolve in one another.
So I have to find Reverend Shari. There you are. And now I'm going to spotlight you for everyone. And if you would like to ask a question, Shari, do you want to say something to begin?
I'll simply say that I'm delighted to be here. I often will watch recordings of folks, but I don't often make it here. I think it's been probably over a year since I've been to an elder tree. And so I am just really, really grateful for the invitation to be with you all today.
So to ask a question, if you can raise your hand and help me see who's raising their hands, because I've got Shari in the spotlight, which means I've got a row of people across the top and I don't see everybody. If you hit the reactions button, it will give you the option of raising your hand. And that way you go to the head of the line, like Ann Perry knows how to do that. Ann Perry, go ahead.
Reverend Shari, whatever happened to your acting career?
Oh, Anne, right out of the gate. Well, so I appreciate this question. It comes with a bit of a confession. So I'm assuming that Anne knows a story that not everybody here knows, which is to say my freshman year of college, after I came back from school and I was at home living with my parents, applying for a job at Starbucks, a summer barista job, I got a call from my aunt saying, hey, I want you to come to this audition. This is one of the things about growing up from LA or growing up in LA that I guess sometimes happens, but it's only happened to me one time. And she said, bring your glasses. And that's all she said to me. And so I showed up at her house and we drove to this audition. And I ended up being cast in a Skittles commercial that was run for months. I mean, it was a huge commercial and it showed internationally. And it's the only acting I've ever done outside of, I think, probably, Solstice and Memory Tree. And so I don't have an acting career. I had one acting moment. And I'll admit that in worship, the places where I am taking on a persona that is not my own, they are by far the most difficult and soul-rending Sundays for me. I find them incredibly challenging. I have, unlike a lot of ministers, no theater or acting experience, but I was in a Skittles commercial.
So Lynn Kinsman follows up with it in the chat. She said, wow, best summer job ever. What about that improv class you talked about?
Yeah, I went to that improv audition for 2 hours and that was it. No.
So somebody has their hand up.
Looks like Juanita.
Lynn Kinsman has her hand up.
I wanted to know what inspired you to go into ministry.
Great, I love that question. And then I saw Juanita afterwards, so there may be others. So I'll start with what helped me become a Unitarian Universalist, because there are many ministers who would be ministers, if not in Unitarian Universalism, in generally speaking, a liberal Christian tradition, or perhaps a Reform or Reconstructionist rabbi, maybe a Buddhist leader of some variety. I am probably not that. I am a Unitarian Universalist before and undergirding my ministry. There's a lot about ministry that I would do without the title, but I am a Unitarian Universalist first and foremost. And so I came into Unitarian Universalism through Elizabeth, through my wife. I grew up without any sort of religious context or background, and that's a little more nuanced. We can talk about that another time. But for the most part, religion was something that other people did. It was mostly a cultural tradition that came from wherever your parents were from. And I didn't really know very many religious people. And I went to a Catholic university and had, I think, neutral to negative assumptions about what it meant to be in a faith-based community, that it was something that was oppressive and dogmatic. And to be clear, there are parts of that that are real, but I also met Catholics whose social justice work, whose way of being in community was guided by something that I didn't really have access to, that I didn't know much about. And I had this sort of holy envy. So Catholicism carved out this space within me that Unitarian Universalism came and sat down in. And I went to college at a faith-based university specifically because I wanted to work in international development. I knew that I wanted to be with people and that I wanted to work across cultures and that I wanted to do something that made a difference. It was very idealistic. And since then, I've been at various times in my life, really cynical with a very sophisticated power analysis about what it means to do good work. And that's a part of me too, but I have come back around to, the core thing for me in my work and how I spend my time between birth and death is that I, through working with other people, make a difference. And so, there are lots of ways to do that, but ministry just happens to be a wonderful invitation to do that in lots of different ways. So, any given day and any given week, there are probably 5 or 6 different types of work that I do. Some of it's administrative business work, some of it's writing, some of it's speaking, some of it's direct service, some of it's listening. And so I love the variety that ministry offers, and I love being in a Unitarian Universalist community and context. And like so many other people, the call to ministry came out of someone else's mouth, which is to say I was speaking with a minister and talking about my career and my job. And at the time I worked as a Peace Corps recruiter. And she said to me, have you ever thought about doing a unit of clinical pastoral education? Have you ever thought about, you don't have to commit, you don't have to do ministry for the rest of your life, but try it, do a 3-month thing and see what comes of that. And that set me on the path. So Jill Bowden was the mouthpiece for the call. Yeah, thank you.
Shari, you talk about going to a faith-based college. This is Libby here, wherever I am on your screen.
Sure.
You talk about going to a faith-based college, and we talk about ourselves being a faith-based community, but faith means really different things in those contexts. So can you describe a little what faith means to you as a UU?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I'll just jump really quickly to Deborah White posted a comment about the concept of holy envy. And I will fully admit and cite my sources here, which is to say that's not my term. Barbara Brown Taylor is a theologian and an Episcopal priest, and is an Episcopal priest, but the church that she attends is the church that Bob Rangillian serves as minister in North Carolina. So So I've got a couple different types of holy envy, quite frankly, and one of them is that Barbara Brown Taylor is at Reverend Bob's church. But so faith, right? It does mean something different. I think there's this sort of constellation of understanding, and I don't think in Catholicism faith is completely different than what I mean as a Unitarian Universalist. But often faith we use as a sort of proxy for in a derisive or negative way, we'll sometimes use faith in opposition to reason, or in opposition to science, or in opposition to data and research. And I don't think that is, I don't think it's fair, but I also don't think it's entirely incorrect. Faith is trust that the sun will return even when it is dark, right? So faith is based on what I have seen in the world. And this is a tricky one. This definition I have, my suspicion will be that it won't work for everyone in this room, but that faith is based on what I have seen. I have trust that there is for me as a Unitarian Universalist, a greater love working in the world. Now, I think that love is best reflected in nature, in music, in the ways that people find the holy in incredibly terrible situations. And that ability to be with each other in suffering and in celebration is where that trust is based on. And so faith I'll often use to talk about, what is the tradition that brings us together? I'll use faith to talk about our Unitarian Universalism, but at its core, it is a trust in a fundamental goodness that doesn't always show up. It's not to say that everything's cheerful and sunny all the time, but that there's agency and options and both fierce love and a gentleness in the natural world and in relationship.
Anne and Tom have their hand up.
So,
You could.
okay, Shari, reflecting back to when you first decided to come to First Unitarian, I'm sure you had certain expectations or thought things that you thought you knew about what First Unitarian would be like. What has been the most surprising thing that you've learned over the last 2 years about us, about Rochester, about ministry?
There are a couple of things that I'd like to lift up. One of them is about Rochester and First Unitarian combined, which is to say, there is a clear pride of place that First Unitarian folks and Rochesterians have. And that is complicated also by this sort of sense of, and maybe this will seem unfair and you all can take me to task for it later, and I would welcome that. But there is this sort of sense of we're not New York City, that, the search team, when we first interviewed, there was this lovely thing that you all did where you shared, something that you loved about Rochester. And I love that because I got to know this city and this place and this community through your eyes. But there was also this way in which I thought, is this motivated by this sense that we need to convince people to like Rochester? Are we making up for something? And on other days, you all know that this is, in lots of ways, the best place in the world to live. It's beautiful, it's great, and the people are wonderful. But I don't think I realized the ways in which that would come into our church culture. So there's a sense of innovation and pride. And, there's a double edge to that. Sometimes that can mean we're a little bit arrogant about our own initiatives, right? That like, if we didn't invent it at First Unitarian, it's no good. Sometimes that can come out, that's real. But there's just a real gentleness and humility and human relationship that I see in this church, that churches of this size in places like New York City or Los Angeles, or, well, there are no churches of this size in Los Angeles, but don't seem to have. So that's been a real joy. And I've loved that. I've loved seeing that. And I didn't necessarily know to expect it, right? It's not something I took for granted. That second thing you said about what have I learned about ministry, or the sort of last option around surprises. I knew it to be true in an intellectual way, but as a lived experience, it is different. And this is Elder Tree, so you all have, to a certain extent, lived experience with this in your personal lives. But we've just compiled the names for Memory Tree this year, and we had 14 members die in our church this year, as well as many others, but 14. And the layers of grief, right, that we get to celebrate people's lives, I think, wonderfully here in memorial services. And in general, I think we say goodbye very well. But you carry it with you. And every summer, when I take weeks off, that comes flooding back the first week is, oh yeah, these are the goodbyes we said this year. But then Sunday came and I had to sort of put it away somewhere in my soul. So, yeah. I see Deborah and then Juanita again.
Yeah.
Previously had a question.
Okay.
So Shari, I'm very interested about your upbringing and who shaped you into, if it was parents or other people, who shaped you into being you and you feel like served as good role models for you.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite questions. I talk about being loved into being. And I think that that's a core theological claim that I make, that none of us arise in isolation. And it's not always good role models, and it's not always our parents or the people we met early in life. But for me, it was, and in part, at least. They're certainly not the only ones who have formed me. I mean, I have no doubt that you are loving me into being. I am loving you into being. It's a lifelong process. But my early life is marked by a really large extended family in Los Angeles. And so my dad's family immigrated from China in 1968. And he came over as a junior high school student, and or a little bit before then, because my parents went to junior high together. So that's how they first met. And my mom is sort of Western European mix, mostly Scottish and German and Irish and English. And most of those strands have been in the US for some time, but she came from Northern California, from ranch country. Her grandfather owned a ranch, and her father owned a restaurant for a time with my grandmother, but also mostly rode in rodeos, was very much like the son of a ranch owner who did whatever he wanted, which wasn't a particularly great family setting. So in any case, so both my parents, through various contexts, moved to LA right before junior high, and each of them have many siblings. So my mom has 3 siblings and my dad has 4, and all of my aunts and uncles were also in Los Angeles, as well as my grandparents, or my grandmother, and then my grandparents on my dad's side. So for me, when I say family, I do mean my parents and my younger sister. My nuclear family does matter an awful lot to me, but family for me is a collection of whatever 20 to 35 people happened to show up that Sunday or Saturday when we got together, because we got together almost weekly, whether it was for someone's birthday or so. That sense of what it means to be in community, which is to say it's large, it talks a lot, and it's not necessarily the same people each and every week. And yet the family as an entity is the same thing, even if the individual players move in and out of it, is critical to who I am and how I understand what it means to be in relationship. So it makes probably pretty good sense that I'm a church person, right? So my family, I'm the first one in my family to go to college, working class growing up. My parents are now very comfortably upper middle class. They worked for the Postal Service from when they were 18 until when they retired. And so, and you know, we don't have jobs or careers like that anymore. But when they retired, they had done pretty well for themselves. They had gotten into jobs that now you couldn't get into without a bachelor's or usually even an advanced degree. But because they had the longevity, they were able to. And so what it meant was my family was more financially comfortable than the rest, my nuclear family, than the rest of my extended family. And so a combination of that and scholarship meant that I went to a very sort of fancy is really the, I think, most accurate word to use, prep school. And so had this sort of dual identity and upbringing of both two cultural contexts in my family, right? I had the white side of the family who mostly married people of Mexican descent, or people who had recently immigrated from Mexico, and then the Chinese side of my family. And that was my home life. And then at school, I was with the incredibly, in lots of ways, incredibly privileged children of the elite. You know, lots of, anytime anyone from Hollywood goes to court for killing someone, their lawyer is probably a parent of someone I went to school with. And so those were the earliest. And then I think that liberal Catholic community at Fordham was sort of the third entity that really formed who I became as an adult.
Well, I thank all of them for helping build you into being.
I do as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So I'll ask.
Okay,
Was there
Juanita.
somebody else who had their hand up that I did not see?
I think Juanita Steinman is unmuted
Oh, okay.
now, and then you've got
Okay,
Howie
great.
and Dawn and Linda.
Go ahead, Juanita.
Yeah, hi Shari. So
Hi.
happy to have you here. You actually answered part of the question I had about how you felt about Rochester and coming here. I wondered, well, I'm going to first go back and say, when you did the Skittles commercial, do you get a lifetime supply of Skittles? That's one question.
Great.
But the other is there something you really miss about so-called big city life as opposed to being here? And was the adjustment difficult?
Great. So you don't get a lifetime of Skittles. And it is, I know, it is a shame because I've returned to liking Skittles. So I will say after that filming, I ate a lot of Skittles that day because I didn't know how to do this. And so they offered me a spit bucket, but I don't know, I was 18 and was like, I'll eat unlimited Skittles. This is fine. And then I definitely threw up. So that was not the most glamorous Hollywood moment around. But I've returned to really enjoying Skittles. It feels very nostalgic for me. As far
How
as the
about
adjustment,
residuals?
I did get residuals, right? So for those who don't know how sort of entertainment compensation works, I got paid, I think, $500 for the filming, which felt great. I mean, it was 4 hours of work of eating Skittles for me. That was awesome. But then I made tens of thousands of dollars of a few pennies every time it showed. So it was, I traveled to Europe, I traveled to South Africa. I had a really great college experience because of residuals. Wrong. Incredible privilege and luck. And and also I'll just back to the Skittles commercial. What I didn't say and should have, which was why my aunt wanted me to bring my glasses and why she called me and not my sister, was I found out later that the casting call was looking for nerds, basically. Which was fine. I took that nerd check to the bank. So, but as far as the adjustment goes, no, it was much easier than I anticipated. I love New York City. I am not someone who, there are lots of people who move there and think, I can't wait to move. I can't wait to have a laundry machine, a washing machine in my apartment. I can't wait to have a parking spot. I can't wait to just not have life be so hard. And I loved it. I thought it was a wonderful place to be. And, I don't know if it's just an unflappable good attitude or that Rochester is actually an excellent place to live, but I have found that same delight in living in Rochester. And after about 6 months here, Elizabeth and I looked at each other and said, are you in less pain? Are you just less tired all the time than you used to be? Because I am. And I was like, yes, that feels real. I didn't realize quite how much wear and tear the big city had on me. But I've really loved it here. It's been much less of an adjustment, in part because, quite frankly, the church takes up a lot of my time. And so there's this sort of romanticization we do, I think, of big cities where like, oh, well, there's 40 things you could do every night. But that's not actually true because we only have one body and one ability to attend to whatever's happening. So that sort of unlimited possibility is not realistic. I will say the times I have missed the city the most are the moments when I've had a bit of survivor's guilt, I think is a fair way to put that, of realizing that my friends and colleagues in New York over the last year and a half, I would go on hikes and I have a backyard, and I was hearing from them in 2020, I haven't left my apartment in the 450 square feet that I live in. I have not left in 5 months. That's just a reality that I have not had to live. And I've wondered what it has meant to have this very charmed life in Rochester. And we've had people move up from New York City. I don't know if you all know this, but we've had at least one UU move to Rochester, in part because they looked around and said, I got to go somewhere. Shari lives in Rochester. I'll try that out.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Howie has his hand up and Don Wilder. So Howie goes first and then Don, and then we'll see where we go.
Hi, Shari.
Hi.
I want to come back to the question of faith. And if I understand you correctly, faith to you is in some ways an interpersonal dimension, a belief, an understanding the goodness of people and human potential, and kind of a faith that we can together continue to heal the universe and ourselves and have a beloved community. I'm elaborating a bit.
Sure,
but
sure.
It sounds like that it's that sort of understanding that you have. And for other people, faith is to some extent a transcendental understanding or experience, a sense that there are forces at work in the universe. Many would call God, many would call other things, describe other ways, but a force in the universe that is beyond, it may include human connection, but it's bigger and it has a mystical element almost. Is that not a part of that latter understanding of faith? Is that not a part of your understanding and experience?
I appreciate coming back to that.
And I'm curious to know whether that's a hard question for you.
It's not a hard question, but I regret perhaps not articulating
I was just
it.
adding.
Good.
I was curious to know if that's a hard question for you. Like, are you worried you'll alienate half the congregation if you say yes or no to that question?
Well, I do worry about that a little bit, but I think you deserve a straight answer. So all to say that I appreciate the question. It's not hard to answer, but I think hard in my regret of maybe I didn't speak particularly clearly, which is to say, I think human community is where we witness something, that deep love and trust, right? So, the Pope is fond of saying, you pray for the hungry and then you go and feed the hungry. That's how prayer works, right? The ways in which we are instruments of something that lies beyond us feels true to me, right? So I name nature and music as other places where evidence of a great love arises. So community is deeply important. I don't think, here's a controversial statement, because people hear it and think, oh, well, if you don't come on Sunday, then, Shari's saying you're not a real Unitarian Universalist. That's not true. I don't think you have to show up every week, but I do think it is really darn hard to be a Unitarian Universalist without community. I think for us, it is that being in community and understanding our faith in relationship with others that is critical. But I don't think the community itself is actually the object of faith or reverence or the sole thing that holds us. I think between people is one of the places we are most likely to witness that transcendental language that you talk about, that vertical element. It's a place where it shows up. It's a place where I have the lens to see it, right? It's the sort of like my part of the elephant. You all know that story of people having their hands on different people who can't see, blind people. And so they say that the creature is a tail, or the creature is an ear, or the creature is a trunk, and it's a piece of it. I have a lens attuned to human relationship. There are others, as I look around here, who have attention to light that quite frankly goes deeper, has a language and a framework and a facility with attention to light that I don't have. It's not as, I haven't put in the spiritual work to cultivate that kind of attention. I have put in the spiritual work thus far to see it and to witness it in community. But I don't think that's the only, again, that I don't think community is the thing itself. It's the vessel. Yeah. And I do worry that half of you are sitting there thinking, well, that's poppycock, but yeah, such is how we are together.
Thank you. Don Wilder and then Ruth.
Hi, Shari.
Hi, Don.
I'm wondering how you and Elizabeth got together, and this is partly about Elizabeth, but I happen to get the Johns Hopkins magazine, so I know I've read about Rhymes with Opera, if that's its name. And are you connected with that at all, or is that all Elizabeth's, and what's it doing?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm biased. I love Elizabeth and questions about Elizabeth. So we got together. So after we both graduated from college and before I left for Peace Corps, so before I left for 2.5 years in East Africa, in Uganda, and after she had moved to New York to become an opera singer, both of us were working as baristas, obviously, so in a coffee shop. And And there were two things that were true about that first time we met working together at a coffee shop. One was that you can call it infatuation. I'll let you make your own choices about this, but that I was deeply in love with this person who I had spent about 15 minutes with. And I don't believe in love at first sight. So, that's the thing about ministry, is you happen to hear a lot about things that happen to people that they don't believe in. And this is one of my experiences of that. And she pulled out a red "What do Unitarian Universalists believe" card from her wallet. So we met working in a coffee shop, and she's made a very big difference in my life in many ways. So she runs two opera companies. One is Rhymes with Opera, which is based out of New York City. This is their 15th year. Is that right? Oh gosh, I believe it's their 15th year. And then she runs another one that she started in pandemic because she wasn't traveling down to New York City. And she realized there were a ton of singers in Rochester who lived in Rochester, but except for students at Eastman, there aren't a ton of opportunities to perform. Folks are traveling to New York City or to Toronto or all over the place. And so mostly what they've done is online, but obviously they're hoping to migrate that to in-person performances. But it's a collection of singers who put on mostly concert series now. So Rhymes with Opera specializes in contemporary opera and their chamber pieces. So it's usually 6 musicians and 3 to 5 singers and a production team. And they've done some really interesting and cool things online. It's been a strange turn of events to have her have to film herself in our home for her career, and me be able to teach her a thing or two about sound and video that I've learned over the last couple of years. So thanks, Dawn.
I'm muted. Apparently Linda Friedman has been waving and I haven't seen her. So Ruth, do you mind letting Linda go first and then you're next? Linda, where are you?
Okay. What made you go across the country for college?
Well, so as I mentioned, because I'm the first person in my family to go to college, I didn't have a ton of context. And so in movies and TV, people go to college on the East Coast, and particularly in Boston. So that's where I thought I'd go to college. And there are wonderful schools in LA. I laugh at the naivete then of, in Dirty Dancing, the waiter goes to Yale, and that must be where people go to college. Like, this is how I learned about going to higher education. So then when I started looking at specifically at faith-based schools, what it came down to was Brandeis, which is a Jewish school in Boston, and then Fordham, which is a Catholic school in New York City, and went to Fordham because they gave me more money. It is as simple as that. I wish it were more elegant, but
No, that's okay.
no.
So Ruth, go ahead.
Good morning, Shari.
Yeah.
Coming to you from your hometown.
Oh, I'm
Where it's
so
a little-
delighted for you.
Where it's a little earlier.
Oh my goodness.
The question I had, you came to Unitarian Universalism from no real faith background.
Mm-hmm.
But many of us have come to First Unitarian from other religious backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in your thoughts about, this has often been on my mind. Is it expected, or what is your thought? Do people go from being Jewish to being Unitarian, or from being Catholic? Or does that, how does that, what is the interplay? of your previous faith community as you come into a new faith community?
Yeah.
Or to Unitarianism?
Right. Well, I think this relates to that question around my own background and being loved into being, and also that early formative experiences aren't always loving or positive, right? So I'll just name also that as I look around this room, there are at least 2 people who have been Unitarian Universalist, or at least Unitarian, or maybe Universalist, I'm realizing now as I look at here. But there are people born into and raised in this tradition. And that's more and more common, in part because we've stopped doing our religious education where we say, well, Unitarian Universalism is really just a place where you can believe whatever you want. And here are some options, and then go pick one, right? We've stopped doing that. So it means that people actually have a shot at being born and raised Unitarian Universalist and then staying Unitarian Universalist. But also that more and more people are growing up outside of a faith context, right? So most of the people who are either sort of young adults in college or sort of adults working and have kids who are young, and a lot of people are looking for a community when their kids are around school age. Most of them are coming to us now without a context of a faith tradition. So this is more and more common, but that's all to say, again, as we look around the room, the basic premise, Ruth, of, well, and lots of us do come in with something else. And what's the interplay there is a good question to be asking. And I think there are a couple of things for me that I think are important there. One is a lot of times, and this is the one that we tend to pay a little bit more attention to. A lot of times people are coming because they are leaving or have left that tradition in the past. There was something there that didn't work for them. And that can be a huge spectrum of things. And sometimes that didn't work for them can be out and out spiritual violence and trauma, right? So it could be that the faith community that they were in told them that because they were gay, or because they were trans, or because they were divorced, or for any number of reasons, or because they asked too many questions, they didn't belong here and were not a worthy part of this community. That trauma is real, and we have to be attentive to it. I think often people come into Unitarian Universalist communities thinking, okay, great, the way I can survive here is that we'll never have to talk or deal with that. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. I think that in ways that make sense and over the course of time, being able to seek healing around trauma or past experiences is really important. I don't think that we put it in a box and then never attend to it. So that's a piece of it. The other piece that, quite frankly, is way more common, but we talk about less, is that people come from other traditions and overall had a pretty positive association with that tradition. It didn't work for them. They left it for some reason. Maybe that doctrinally it just wasn't a perfect fit. But on the whole, they really liked being Methodist, or they really liked being Jewish, or they really liked being whatever it is. And it's not an object of violence and trauma, but instead just a shift in community belonging. And in those cases, I think, and it's never a binary, it's never all one thing or the other. But in those cases, I don't think we ever fully shed the formative stages of who we were before. I think you come in as somebody who had this background, and that part of you ideally has a way to be nourished and nurtured. And I recently had a conversation with a Reform rabbi colleague in town who was saying, all of those people of Jewish descent in your congregations, and I look around and I know that applies to a lot of folks in this room, like, you shouldn't let them become UUs. You should make them go back to Judaism. And I was a little taken aback, I had to really think about what this person was saying, because I think there is some truth and reality to, there may be things that people spiritually need that quite frankly aren't going to happen here, right? And I don't mean to say that's only true for people of Jewish descent or background. If you are somebody who spiritually is nourished by taking communion every week, that's probably not going to happen at First Unitarian, right? If you're someone whose spiritual needs are met in other communities, I do absolutely want to encourage people to seek out other resources. And I think there's room here for some of that to be nourished. I think there is good reason people have found a home in this community, and we don't need to shed who we were. There's no loyalty test that says you're only a Unitarian Universalist and you're not somebody who cares about saying the rosary, or you're not somebody who's going to celebrate Passover. These are pieces that I think authentically belong to people and grow from a tradition. And ideally, we offer enough support for those spiritual practices here for everyone, but recognizing real limitations. We can't be all things to everybody. And so it may be that folks are with us and seeking out support in other ways. I don't expect that just because you come to church, you're never going to read poetry on your own. I don't suspect that because you come to church, you're never going to go commune with nature. In fact, I'd really like you to do those things. So Ruth, I suspect I maybe answered your question too much and not enough.
No, it was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Dave Friedman has his hand up.
Oh, great. And
Yes,
then we need
I was wondering if you had any advice on how one nourishes the concept of the inherent worth and dignity of all persons while we watch the news and observe what people are doing in our country at the moment.
Yeah.
A quick aside, by the way, Dick Schwartz and I represented the church in some meeting. I don't remember what it was about years ago with the temple. So here we had 4 people sitting down, Schwartz, Friedman, and 2 temple members. And it looked kind of odd.
I'm sure you represented us very well. Thank you. So how do we love jerks? Is that the question?
We maintain the concept of feeling the inherent worth and dignity of all people when we watch what some people are doing, which I'm finding that challenging. I don't know if you had any wisdom on this topic.
Yeah, it is incredibly hard. It is the fundamental challenge of both our Unitarian heritage and our Universalist heritage, right? So if Unitarians believe in this like deep and abiding power and goodness of humanity, well, there's not enormous evidence that that's always true. And the Universalists, in terms of a universal love, have it a little bit easier, I think, quite frankly, because I'd really love if we could, I mean, Howie, to your point of, we've got a lot of opinions and you don't want to alienate half the room. I would really love to be able to say, God loves them all, so I don't have to, right? But that's not actually how our universalism works. And yet it does, there is truth to that, which is to say, here's the deal about that inherent worth and dignity is we don't do anything to deserve it. We do not, that principle does not apply to people because they are good or well-behaved or reasonable or people we like. Right? The inherent piece is you as a human have worth and dignity simply by virtue of being here. And there is nothing you can do to take it away. There is nothing I can do to take it away from you. Which means a couple of things. It doesn't mean we have to like everybody. It doesn't mean we have to be without boundaries or limitations on the types of relationships we're willing to engage with everyone in. But I do think it calls us to, on a very fundamental level, be able to approach every other person with this sense of, before all else, before any judgments, before this is hard when people can't stop from talking right out of the gate, but before anything, that your value as a human being is non-negotiable. And that may be where it ends, right? That's not to say your opinion is a good one or well-founded. It's not to say that we have to work together on everything. But I do think as a spiritual practice, before all else, the recognition that this person has value as a fellow being is the thing that we're really called to. It is challenging, right? There are absolutely both the hypothetical, philosophical exercises we do with the very worst behaving people in history and the very worst behaving people in our personal lives, that can be fundamentally hard to start there, to say you are worthy as a human being. But I do think our universalism calls us to it. So that's for me the most immediate practical application.
That question is a multitude of sermons, I think.
It sure is, yeah.
The Maniloffs have their hand up, and I think that's going to have to be our last question.
Oh, it's true. I'm very talkative.
Go ahead, Jack and Sandy.
Are we unmuted?
Yeah, you're on.
I don't think we're unmuted.
You are.
Oh, good, good. One of the bright spots, if there are any of this last pandemic period, has been Elder Tree, where there's been getting together and feeling connected with old friends every week. And Libby's done a wonderful job, and now she has a crew helping her. And I wonder, when you saw what was going to happen with not having church, how did you respond to that? How were you going to get through starting Zooms and everything, and keeping us together as a church? Because we've had people every week show up and want to still be a part of the church. And how did you face that?
Yeah, I mean, in lots of ways, perhaps you all know the answers to this because you've seen at least parts of what's happened. But I think the biggest piece was that I didn't have to do it alone, right? So Libby running Elder Tree is a really good example of this. And Libby forming a team now to help is a really good example of this, is that none of us have done any of this alone. And by any of this, I guess I mean the connection. I know lots of people have had incredible sort of variations on solitude and loneliness over the last 2 years or last 2 decades even, right? I mean, so there were a couple of things that went into sort of how we made that pivot. The biggest one would be we aimed for connection, not perfection, right? That we know that Sunday morning, this past Sunday online, we had some sound issues. And that's tough because I know that it's hard to sit there when there's bad sound and people are going to log off and things like that. And so we worked really hard to make sure that that first week that we were meeting online, the technology would work. And I want to lift up Tommy in particular for being a partner in that work, where the two of us were able to pivot and say, okay, this is what that's going to mean. Part of that was making the decision to switch to Zoom was pretty easy because I had been using Zoom already, right? That I already had some of this technology. Some of us on the team already knew some of the tools. And so we could build on that. So having a little bit of a head start was helpful. but not as it turned out necessary, because a ton of, hundreds of people learned how to do it in a week's time. So we thought about, okay, what does it mean for people to be able to connect? How do we keep up the rhythm of our Sunday gathering, and really boil it down to essentials, right? We need to be able to make sure that people can connect, and that matters way more than any sort of video editing extravaganza. It also meant that, connection, we can build the thing, but if people don't know how to access it, they're not going to be able to connect, right? And so there were a couple of things that went into that. One of that was, setting up a call line so people could call in, and different people staffed that, right? So people could call in to learn how to download Zoom. Someone would walk you through it, and publicize that, not only in our own community, but as a lot of smaller churches were struggling to make that pivot. I mean, we have the gift of lots of leaders and lots of staff. And so we could do things that other congregations couldn't do. And so people were freaking out about how do our people learn how to use Zoom? And we said, hey, we've got this helpline, give out this phone number. We'll walk them through it. We can do that for churches in New York State. That's completely fine. We formed, and hopefully you all know about this, you either participated as someone who was serving as a caring steward or received contact from other people. But, we knew that one of the things about not being able to see each other, and about all the sort of, we don't know if it's safe to go out, there's a lot of uncertainty, was how do we just check in on people? Can we get a friendly voice on the phone to say, is there anything you need that your church can be supportive of? And over 30 people helped make those contacts, and we contacted 1,200 people once a month for a few months, and then again toward the end of last year. So just building opportunities for connection, and then making sure that we have in some ways, the open invites, but meeting people where they are, making sure that they can access it, right? We've selected Zoom because people can call in, even if they don't have a computer, they can access the audio. That was really important to us. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, Sandy,
that was
but
good.
yeah,
Great.
a lot of help is the short answer. Oh, and now I'm over time. Darn.
Oh, but it has been, we could go on for hours, I think. I am going to unspotlight you, Shari, and go to gallery view so that we can all just wave each other goodbye. There are several comments in the chat about thank you so much. And I know that I'm not the only one who's incredibly grateful for you spending Saturday morning with us. It has been a blessing. I will see you all next week. We're going to talk more or less about who has loved us into being. That question is really sort of what we've been thinking about, and connected with the memory tree service tomorrow. And so we're going to have a conversation. I hope to see as many of you as possible. I love this connection. I love all of you. We'll see you in church. Bye.
Hi, everyone.